One of the cruelest lessons school teaches is this: the student who looks most exhausted is not always the one who rises to the top. Sometimes the one who sleeps more, studies less, and appears almost careless is the one who walks away with a higher score. And that is what makes it sting, because it does not merely feel unfair. It makes your effort feel suspect. It makes you wonder whether all those late nights, all that pressure, all that grinding fatigue were never building mastery at all. Only the appearance of sacrifice. So before we call them lazy, we need to face a harsher possibility. Perhaps the real divide was never effort versus laziness, but wasted effort versus targeted effort. There is a particular kind of pain hidden inside academic life. It is not dramatic enough to look like collapse, yet it slowly corrodes your trust in yourself. It arrives in small, humiliating moments, when the papers are handed back, when answers are compared in a half-laughing voice, when somebody who seemed far less consumed than you somehow ends up above you yet again. After a while, the wound is no longer just about marks. It becomes something heavier. It becomes a quiet doubt about fairness, about ability, about whether effort itself can still be trusted. Because when you have given a subject your time, your sleep, your weekends, your peace of mind, and the result still refuses to move, the mind does not stay neutral for long. It begins to turn against itself. Perhaps I am not sharp enough. Perhaps I am always going to be one of those people who works twice as hard to arrive halfway. Perhaps all this strain is not proof of discipline, but proof that something in me is missing. That is why this subject cuts deeper than study tips and revision methods. It touches pride, it touches identity, it touches the frightening moment when hard work stops feeling noble and starts feeling pointless. And yet this is exactly where the misunderstanding becomes most dangerous. Many students are not losing because they lack intelligence, discipline, or bias, or seriousness. They are losing because they have been taught to mistake visible struggle for meaningful progress. They have come to believe that the longer they remain at the desk, the more legitimate their effort becomes. They measure the worth of a study session by how drained they feel afterwards. They trust exhaustion because exhaustion looks expensive, and anything expensive must surely count for something. But the mind does not work like that. Memory is not moved by how noble your suffering looked from the outside. Attention does not deepen simply because you stayed in the chair for another hour. An exam does not award marks for the nights you sacrificed, the invitations you turned down, or the ache behind your eyes. It asks only one cold question. When the page is in front of you and the pressure is real, can you retrieve what matters? That is why so many sincere students end up trapped inside a very convincing illusion. They read and reread until the page feels familiar. They highlight, rewrite, organize, decorate, and copy notes in ways that make the work feel substantial. There is a comfort in that, a strange, fragile comfort. It creates the sensation of contact. It gives the day a structure. It produces the reassuring thought that something serious must be happening because so much time is passing and so much material is being handled. Yet familiarity is not the same as recall. Recognition is not the same as mastery. A page that looks increasingly known can still vanish from the mind the moment it is needed most. That is the brutal part. So much of ineffective studying does not feel ineffective while it is happening. It often feels responsible, mature, safe. You sit there surrounded by papers, tabs, summaries, colored lines, and the scene itself begins to resemble achievement. But when the book is closed, when the question is phrased differently, when the safety of this original wording disappears, the truth steps forward. What you had was not knowledge you could summon. It was knowledge you could recognize when it was shown to you. And in an exam, recognition is a weak shield. The student you call lazy may have realized this sooner. Not always consciously, not always elegantly, but in practice. They may appear calmer because they spend less time performing seriousness and more time exposing weakness. They close the book and ask, what can I still say without looking? They test themselves early enough to be uncomfortable. They let mistakes appear before it is convenient. They are willing to meet the ugly truth while there's still time to repair it. From the outside, that does not always look intense. Sometimes it even looks relaxed. But underneath that calm is something sharper than panic: selectivity. This is the difference that so often goes unnoticed. One student keeps feeding time into a method that protects their confidence in the short term. The other keeps choosing methods that threaten their confidence in the short term, but strengthen their performance later. One stays inside the warm fog of familiarity. The other repeatedly steps into the colder space where memory has to work. One leaves the desk feeling dutiful. The other often leaves feeling slightly exposed. Yet when the test arrives, it is usually the second student who can still think clearly enough to retrieve, connect, and apply. None of this means the so-called lazy student has discovered a miracle. It means they are less willing to waste effort on things that look studious but do not survive pressure. They may revise in shorter bursts, but with clearer intention. They may stop earlier, but not because they care less. They stop because there's a point beyond which attention decays and extra time becomes theater. They may sleep more, not out of innocence, but because memory is strengthened by recovery, not endless abrasion. They may seem detached from this ritual of academic suffering simply because they have already understood that suffering and learning are not the same currency. This is hard to hear when you have spent months or years equating pain with progress. It is hard because it forces you to look back at entire seasons of your life and ask whether the struggle was as productive as it felt. It is hard because it threatens a story many people cling to for dignity. If I suffer enough, the result must eventually recognize me. But life, and especially testing systems, can be merciless in this regard. They do not always reward sincerity. They reward alignment. They reward whether your method matches the demand. That is why the emotional cost becomes so high. When ineffective effort continues for too long, failure stops feeling like feedback and starts feeling like a verdict. You no longer think, perhaps this approach is wrong. You think, perhaps I am wrong. A practical problem mutates into a personal sentence, and once that happens, every disappointing score lands with the force of confirmation. The mark is no longer just low. It becomes evidence that you were never enough in the first place. This is where the darkness of the whole experience truly settles in. Not in the grade itself, but in the way it teaches you to narrate your own worth. You see somebody else doing better with what seems like less sacrifice, and the comparison becomes poisonous. Their calm begins to accuse your chaos. Their result begins to expose your method. Their ease begins to make your effort look clumsy, almost embarrassing. And because pain often wants a simple explanation, the mind reaches for the cruelest one. They win because they are better, and I lose because I am not. But that is not the only reading. And for many people, it is not even the true one. There is an enormous difference between being incapable and being trapped in a costly method. One closes the future, the other redraws it. One tells you to shrink your hopes, the other tells you to change your tools. This is why understanding the psychology of learning matters so much. Not because it turns study into something easy, and not because it removes effort, but because it rescues effort from being squandered. It stops you pouring yourself into a leak and then blaming your own worth for the emptiness. The students who consistently score well often understand a few unfashionable truths. They know that the brain remembers better when it is forced to retrieve, not merely re-encounter. They know that spacing and return matter more than dramatic marathons. They know that a practice question answered badly today can be worth more than another polished page of notes that never gets tested. They know that confusion exposed early is a gift, while confusion hidden beneath familiarity becomes a trap. They know that rest is not the opposite of studying, but one of the conditions that allows studying to become durable. And this is where the first thin line of light begins to appear. Not as a cheap reassurance, not as a motivational slogan, not as a promise that everything will suddenly become easy, but as a more honest relief. Perhaps the problem was never that you were too weak for the work. Perhaps the problem was that you kept trying to force progress through methods that drained you faster than they built you. Perhaps you were not failing because you lacked seriousness. Perhaps you were failing because seriousness on its own is a poor map. Once that possibility enters the room, something shifts. You no longer need to worship the longest session. You no longer need to treat fatigue as proof that the day was worthwhile. You can begin to ask better questions. What exactly am I trying to retain? Can I produce it without cues? What do I forget first? Which errors repeat? Where does my focus collapse? What would happen if I revised less theatrically and tested more honestly? The answers to those questions are rarely glamorous. They ask for less ego and more precision, shorter sessions with clearer targets, closing the notes and speaking ideas back in your own words, practicing recall before you feel ready, making mistakes earlier, returning to weak points instead of circling what already feels comfortable, letting sleep do part of the work, accepting that an efficient day may feel less heroic than an exhausting one. This is not the romance of overwork. It is the discipline of friction used wisely. And perhaps that is the deepest reframe of all. The goal is not to become lazy. The goal is to become less wasteful. To stop offering your energy to methods that only imitate progress. To stop confusing the heaviness of a day with the value of a day. To stop punishing yourself in order to feel deserving. Real learning is often quieter than self-torment. It is less theatrical, less visible, and sometimes less emotionally satisfying in the moment. But it survives contact with reality far better. There may come a point, if you keep going this way, when the desk no longer feels like a courtroom, the pile of materials no longer towers over you like a threat, the clock no longer exists only to remind you that other people seem ahead. You will still have difficult days. You will still have topics that resist you. You will still need effort, but the effort will begin to feel directed rather than desperate. Your mistakes will start to look useful rather than shameful. Rest will stop feeling like a betrayal, and marks, even before they fully improve, will no longer have the power to define the whole meaning of who you are. Then the student you once resented may start to look different as well. Not like an insult, not like proof that the world is rigged against you, but like evidence of something you were never properly taught. The system does not always reward the person who suffers most. It rewards with unsettling indifference the person whose method can hold under pressure. That truth is not warm, but it is liberating. Because once you see it clearly, the way forward is no longer hidden behind self-blame. So if you have been the one who studies longer, tries harder, gives more, and still walks away feeling strangely defeated, do not rush to turn that pain into a story about your limits. Do not let a few sets of marks become a philosophy of your worth. Look first at the machinery of your effort. Look at where it leaks. Look at what only feels effective because it is familiar, punishing, and visible. Then begin slowly to build something truer, because sometimes the way out does not come from forcing yourself to keep moving in the dark. Sometimes it begins when you finally allow a narrow beam of light to fall across the road behind you and realize you were never broken, only traveling for too long without the right lamp. Because sometimes the way out does not begin with a dramatic step, but with a quiet moment you stop blaming yourself and finally pick up the lamp again. And if you choose to keep going from here, Mind Psypher will be waiting just ahead, where the light is only just enough not to lose each other.